You're watching Deprogrammed. This is the New Culture Forum show committed to fighting back against the forces of ideological conformity, particularly among the young. My name's Harrison Pitt. I'm a senior editor at the European Conservative, and I'm thrilled to be rejoined today by Evan Riggs, who is a freelance journalist, and our special guest this week, Lois McLatchie Miller, a commentator who you may recognise from GB News and other places, as well as a spokesperson for the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is a real legal heavyweight on behalf of free speech in the culture wars. Lois, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. It's a privilege.
Good. Okay, well, it is said that pride comes before a fall, and fall duly came in the case of Humza Yousaf. But far from sort of showing any humility, the SNP seems to be doubling down on its censoriousness, ushering in sort of new species of blasphemy laws. How do you rate the terrain for free speech in Scotland, and where do you see this going in the next 5 years? I suspect you're part Scottish yourself. So
I am Scottish, yeah. So it's a very interesting scenario to watch unfold. It really is kind of a make or break point for the SNP if they want to recover that kind of centre ground. Again, that they used to hold. They didn't used to always be considered to be this very woke ideological group. Now, of course, they've been best known in recent years for the hate speech law, for bringing in measures about self-identification that can put women and children at risk for the sake of extreme gender ideology. So they've been known for that. Of course, Humza Yousaf had to step down recently, and right now they're still considering putting on further measures for censorship, including introducing buffer zones around every abortion facility in Scotland. Of course, not only banning harassment, which would be fine, but banning silent prayer, offers of help, consensual conversation. So rolling out that censorship further. But I think there's an opportunity here. We're going to go into a leadership contest, and I think there's ground for the next leader, whoever he or she may be, to say, well, let's turn this around. Let's stop going down this rabbit hole of censorship, of promoting this very extreme ideology, and actually walk back and build back to common sense foundations that would actually gain, I reckon, the support of a lot of Scottish people.
I suspect they would gain the support of a lot of Scottish people, but one of the things that I've noticed about, and I think this translates in most contexts, this makes sense at the moment. There is a sort of battle between the elites and the people, but one thing that's particularly odd is how supposedly elite vanguards for Celtic nationalist politics. So, but you get this with Sinn Féin in Ireland, and you get it with the SNP in Scotland. I suspect most of their base is incredibly conservative on a small C level. They're certainly about preserving Scottish heritage, preserving Irish heritage, but the elites seem to be just wanting to lean in to all sorts of progressive madness, which I don't suspect that the people of Scotland care for very much at all, or the people of Ireland in the case of Sinn Féin.
You see the same thing in Canada, really, but it seems to me, and I can only speak from a Canadian perspective, is that they look to America, the sort of England analog on the other side of the pond, and they say, we're just going to be everything that the Republican Party isn't. Right. So it seems to me that the SNP is like, we're Scottish nationalists, but more importantly than that, we're just the anti-Tories. Right. Yeah, and then they make the Tories out to be some sort of far-right party that they're not. I think it would probably be very successful, if the Scots could regain some common sense. Do you actually think that's likely? Because, if I look at Canada, if I look at Ireland, it seems like they just double down at every opportunity.
They certainly seem to. We had Nicola Sturgeon, her reign of 8-9 years collapsed basically off the back of extreme gender ideology and a rejection of that from the Scottish people. So it's very interesting to see that we can fight back and we can challenge these extreme policies where they see fit. Humza Yousaf, of course, seemed to model the same sort of leadership style. He again pushed the boundaries of woke ideology, and again, more or less as a result of that, has ended his career. So 3 times a charm. Do they want to do this play again? We're yet to see, but this is a moment. This is probably their last chance to make that switch if they want to. If they want to elect a leader, and there's a few names in the race already. So if they want to elect a leader who can recover some of that reputation for the SNP, because we know their voter base are not necessarily all sold out on woke ideology. What draws them to the SNP is independence, and for many people, independence alone. And it's a real broad church in there. Last time we had a leadership election between Humza Yousaf and Kate Forbes, and of course Ash Reagan, who came in third, 48% of the membership voted for Kate Forbes, who is known to be a Christian and to hold not as extreme values perhaps as some of her colleagues. So we we know that this is not really reflecting the view of even the party, let alone the Scottish people. So there is a chance now to turn things around for the Scottish government to remodel what it looks like to govern a people, and to govern a people fairly, and to listen to different voices from the spectrum. But it's all in their hands. We have to see what direction they want to take.
I'm kind of holding out for the Humza Yousaf Liz Truss podcast, but let's see if it goes through.
That wouldn't go down.
I'm actually just going to be amazed to see if the next Scottish leader ends up like also having like a family member arrested, which seems to be like a running theme. But actually, reminded me, what happened to Sturgeon? Didn't she?
Yeah.
What, like, what's kind of been the fallout there? Because she just kind of disappeared there. Like, there's police at her like husband's door or something, and then it's like media blackout.
Well, that case, that story is unfolding. So I wouldn't want to speak about live issues going on. But there is a live court case into some of the nebulous reasons or clouds over her departure from the SNP, and how money was managed at the top of the party. So I think we'll wait and see that unfold in the coming months.
What is it Rowling run?
Say that again.
What is J.K. Rowling run? Yeah.
J.K. Rowling, if you're listening, this isn't open.
She must be a regular at this point. There's nowhere else written. There's nothing else written on.
It would be an interesting one, huh?
I don't know. I think McGregor's actually planning on doing Ireland. We'll have to see.
They both have the money to do it, and the public profile.
Well, what else is there to do? Write another book?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Fight another fight?
Wow.
It probably is, to be fair.
I wonder what party she'd run with. I don't know.
It's difficult. This is the thing. So, I mean, there's no obvious... I wonder whether this might be one of the good things. I suspect you'd agree. I don't actually know, but I'm actually very against Scottish separatism. I want us to remain a union. And on the one hand, obviously, it was incredibly cathartic and satisfying to watch Humza Yousaf last week give that wretched speech announcing his resignation. But on the other hand, I do think that he and by representing in his very person the ongoing crisis of the SNP, the sort of the disconnect that clearly exists between the elite vanguard SNP and ordinary voters for Scottish nationalism, I do think that he was a sort of a single-handed was a singular advert against Scottish separatism, and also a very good advert against multiculturalism as well. And I think it was quite useful for the right to be able to point to that as an example of what this means in practice. So I'm actually fearful on one level about a more sensible, common sense person like Kate Forbes getting in, because I wonder whether it might,
bolster independence.
Yeah, a little bit. And I wonder whether it might sort of save the Scottish Nationalist Party from this ongoing psychodrama which has characterised their existence for the last, 5 years or so. I don't know if you'll entertain that at all, that kind of accelerationist approach to the situation, or you love Scotland too much, perhaps.
It's tricky because whether one is for or against independence, the mechanisms that would allow it are still very far off, if not impossible, to achieve. So we're kind of playing in a very hypothetical situation here, no matter what happens to various different political parties. So I think probably my first priority as a Scot is making sure that we get good leadership, and whatever form that comes. I just want somebody who will end the policies of censorship that we have been beholden to. I mean, let's just go back and think about the most recent hate speech law that was passed through our parliament. 7 years in prison for speaking out against, saying something that the government disapproves of on topics such as gender, and that includes in your own family home. No dwelling exemption. There was an actual vote on this, wasn't there? Yeah, and they voted against it. Yeah, there's no exemption for a dwelling space. You're absolutely right. So if kids decide to report their parents for something that they've been told at school is a hateful point of view to hold, then that can very easily end up in a situation where parents are being prosecuted for the kinds of things they're saying at home, and based basically off the perception of what the government deems to be right or wrong. Now, this is an extraordinary law for to take place in a modern Western society. You might think this is 1984, but no, it's 2024. And this is really taking root. So at the moment, I want any leader who is going to roll back some of that. Who will simply allow freedom for Scots. I mean, it's like our iconic cry, right? It's the one that everyone knows is that they can take our lives, they can never take our freedom. Well, guess what? They seem to have done so. They've done just that. I would like it back. William Wallace spinning in his grave. So this is all true. What one question would be, Lois, do you think that the immediate
second-order consequences of that law being brought into force on April Fool's Day of all days, just discredited it off the bat. Like, I think that there were 9,000 complaints. The police obviously are duty-bound to at the very least take a glance at all of them and probably go through them in some detail as well, to determine which ones are legitimate or not, then to choose whether they're going to refer it to prosecution, and then to choose whether to prosecute. I mean, this is just a bureaucratic nightmare. Yeah. And I think most of them were actually against Humza Yousaf himself for denigrating the existence of, God forbid, white people in 96% white Scotland. Okay, so do you think that the unenforceability of this law means that it doesn't matter so much, or it still matters?
I think it still matters because it's on our statute books. I mean, we can mock it. You know, there's several memes going around about the hate monster campaign that came out about it. And it's true, J.K. Rowling was number 2 and Humza Yousaf was number 1 on the most complained about numbers. And you're right, the police did commit to investigate every single report of hate crime that's made. That's 9,000 in the first week. Bear in mind that we've actually dropped investigations into several other minor crimes, basically because of resource capacity in the last few months. But hate crime comes out top, whereas the one that we really care about is mean tweets. So although it was a bit of a farce and a bit of a kind of silly comedy moment to look at how ridiculous the nature of Scottish governance has become, nevertheless, those laws are on our statute books. And I know, I work for ADF International. I see these cases unfold across the globe in countries that already have hate speech laws. In Finland, for example, we supported the defence of a politician of 20 years, a former Home Secretary, and a grandmother of 12.
What's her name again? Resonance?
Ivy
Resonance.
Yeah, incredible woman. And she, in 2019, sent a tweet that had a Bible verse on it and challenged whether her church should really be supporting the Pride Parade. She felt that this was maybe not the best use of church funds. And she sent that tweet.
Possibly heretical as well.
Possibly.
Yeah.
And so she sent that tweet thinking, okay, well, it's probably going to be a bit of a controversial tweet and maybe we'll get some discussion on Twitter, but... well, little did she know she'd be faced with a police investigation, 15 hours spent down at a police cell working out or defending her theology, leading to a criminal trial, which was then appealed to this Helsinki Court of Appeal and is now headed to the Finnish Supreme Court, all because of a tweet about her own biblical view, her own Christian faith. And she was prosecuted under hate speech laws. In fact, in Finland, these fall under war crimes and crimes against humanity in the section of the Finnish Criminal Code. It's absolutely ridiculous. But these things do happen. It's just one example of many cases that we are...
And the problem is when they become statutory, as you say, they become a club in the hands of the people who are most eager to use it.
Exactly.
And usually... that's actually, I'm not saying it should be. I wouldn't want it to be actually, but that's not going to be conservative, like small c, normie conservatives who believe in limited government wanting to use that club. It will be people who want to cram down their values and their ideological hobby horses on everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I always like to compare it to the old blasphemy laws that we had back. It was 1679, something like that, where we had the last trial of a Scottish blasphemer against the church. And he was a student, 20-year-old from Edinburgh, and he should never have been condemned for simply challenging the church. Of course, that was horrendous. But now we have this kind of flip of the law where people who speak out are the new heretics of the day, and they're being charged. They're not being condemned to death for sure. Of course not. We're not back there yet. We never will be. But we are in a situation where we are being censored and being told that we are breaking the law if we express views and opinions that fall short of the doctrine and the dogma and the preferred values of today's dominant religion. Indeed. And it is a religion. It's a set of values, a set of beliefs that people subscribe to. And there's no real difference in having a blasphemy law on one hand that condemns people who don't follow a certain religion and a hate speech law on the other, which prevents people from challenging, I guess, the church of woke, if you like.
Do you not think that there's possibly a silver lining to all this, which is that, sort of as diamonds are made under pressure, and as Christianity and Christians were persecuted for a long time in the formation of their religion, it kind of hardened it and turned it into a faith that has been able to survive now for 2 millennia. Do you not think that by basically disallowing people from proclaiming their faith, in the public sphere or whatever, and kind of getting it out of their system, that they won't just, they'll sort of have the ability now to find other people who think like them, work on things quietly and create something that is actually tangible and real? Or do you think that this will actually have a direct tampering effect, that just people will kind of walk away from religion if they can't expose it in the public square?
I think two things are true at the same time. So if you look kind of from a biblical basis, like we're told to expect persecution as Christians. This is not new, or should not be news to any Christian.
If the world hated you, know that it hated me first.
Indeed. Yeah, exactly. So we are to expect, we see, in other parts of the world where the church is flourishing, this has been the effect. So I think we don't have to fear it. We don't have to fear clampdowns. But another thing is true at the same time, in that when Paul was being persecuted for sharing the gospel, he claimed his rights as a Roman citizen, and he made sure that he had a just and fair trial, not because he was scared necessarily, but because he knew that this is a way to uphold justice, and that's important in a society, uphold that value of free speech for everybody. But secondly, also because this could amplify his message. He could amplify what he wanted to share with the world. And I think that's been a good, Päivi Räsänen's story has gone worldwide at this stage, and people have written across the world of all different persuasions, Christians, not Christian, people from the LGBT community who have been sent to be offended by her tweet, have written to her and said, you know what, I didn't know what Christians thought before, but now I've looked into it because of you, and I think that it's wrong that you're being prosecuted. So I think that it's okay to be seeking to uphold justice in these situations, and it's right to do so. And of course, freedom for Christians to speak is also freedom for everybody to speak, and we want to uphold that right across society as well.
You agree?
No, it's actually, that was a question I wanted to ask you, which is, I can kind of relate this to like sort of the Palestinian protests that are going on in American college campuses now, which is that the more you clamp down on them, the more people hear about it, and then the more support they get. Do you not think that Christians in Europe who feel like they're being persecuted, though possibly not as much as people would argue the Palestinians, should adopt similar tactics?
Can you outline a tactic?
Like staging actual direct protests, maybe not on a college campus, but maybe around a church.
Encampments and sort of
exactly.
holding up public meetings.
And basically try to force the hand of the people that would come after them.
I don't actually think we need to fabricate anything, because we have the live cases where they happen themselves. Take NatCon, which I think you both were at recently.
Yeah.
That wasn't, nobody asked for NatCon to be, certainly no conservative was asking the government to come and shut down NatCon, or there's nothing fabricated about that. But naturally, as a consequence of the political ideology of the day in Brussels, that turned into a story where a lot of people looked at it and said, okay, we have gone too far in clamping down on thoughts, on peaceful gatherings, and therefore a lot of people can look at that. And I think the press coverage was pretty positive on the whole, to say, even if we disagree with these people, we can't just be shutting down gatherings that we disagree with. So I don't think we need to fabricate anything, because I think the examples are there and they speak for themselves. But we can amplify and get behind those who are placed in those situations, like Päivi Räsänen or like Isabel von Spurs in the UK, who was arrested for praying in her head. When these things do happen, we can rally around and show people what has happened as an example of how harsh these laws are getting, and use them as a demonstration in society of what we should be fighting for.
Your point wasn't that we should fabricate them, though. That we should imitate the tactics, the direct action tactics of the left.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't think you need to fabricate. You don't need to pretend that you're being persecuted when you're not. But if look, if people want to come and try to cancel this podcast and it can double their following like it did in NatCon, that's great. And so, what a lot of these protesters on the left do is that they understand that even if they're hauled off campus grounds in handcuffs, that image will go around and they'll be like, okay, look at how horribly I've been treated, and they'll get massive support. It seems to me that conservatives don't ever really do this, and maybe we should start.
Well, again, I just don't think we need to, because we actually have genuine examples.
And they're coming there. I see what you mean. So the point is that if there wasn't enough of a spotlight on us already, then we might need to be a little bit more, just
provocative.
Yeah, provocative. Right. But the fact that there already is, the eye of Sauron has already descended upon us,
right.
And we're already being sort of hunted down, so that it's not necessary. Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I was I think you're right as well, that not only does a Christian have a duty to uphold justice, that's the first point that you made, but also a duty to bear witness. I mean, the martyr in Greek just means witness. You bear witness to what you believe in, and if you shouldn't, I think the general understanding is that you shouldn't deliberately seek out martyrdom as such, because that's just, you know, self-destructive and immolating. But you should be willing to confront it when it comes to you, and I suppose it is coming to us. But not to be too grand about it. But sure.
But I think what the point that you're making in there also is that Christianity is really a message of hope. The message that we're sharing is not we are being persecuted. That's not the front line that we want to share with the world. If it happens, it happens. And if that amplifies the truth of the gospel message, then great. But fundamentally, we're not a kind of angry, hurt victim. We're not appealing to that as our identity. We have a much greater hope, a vision for society which is more positive than we think the others that are on offer can be. And I think putting that message front and center as our goal is the right thing to do. And then when challenges do come, as they have, because of the society that we're in, because of the cultural moment that we're in, we are to expect those challenges. But if they can be used to amplify our message even more, then excellent. Let's embrace that.
What do you make of the decline? I'm less certain that this is actually happening or that the data is fully fleshed out. But what do you make of the supposed decline of believing Christians, especially among the younger generation? It seems strange to me that as men are now becoming more and more right-wing and women are becoming more and more left-wing, there seems to be, according to the best data we have, there's not been a rise in religious men.
Right.
So they have like a political ideology without the faith that comes behind it. Do you think that this is likely to keep going, or do you think that eventually faith will catch up?
Yeah, I think, you can't have the kingdom without the king, right? And there is like a definite hunger, especially amongst young men, to be recovering a kind of moral framework and a society which is ordered in a Christian value system. And there is a danger, I can see a danger, especially amongst, for example, the Red Pill movement, where that is structured without having a kind of Christ-centered vision, which can lead to, if the last few decades have swung to extreme feminism, then the immediate swing back is just equally as toxic.
In a way, the Red Pillars are sort of, you talked about you can't have a kingdom without a king. They're kind of peddling kingship without a kingdom. It's sort of just like I am my own sort of autonomous self, and I just act on my own impulses. But like the idea of existing in relation to anything higher than your own appetites doesn't really register on Andrew Tate's
I think
screen.
you're really onto something there. I think any ideology, any religion that puts ourselves as king, ourselves as God, now whether that's extreme feminism where woman is God to herself, or extreme red pillism where man is God, both of those are going to lead to a destructive outlook. Where essentially it's built on selfishness, it's built on a society where kind of my needs come first, whereas Christianity offers something entirely different. Since we're all equally sinful, we all ultimately need redemption in Christ and living with like the true Savior, the true King, who is ultimately good and not corrupt, is something that can benefit both men and women in society together. So I do see this hunger for something different, and that look towards Andrew Tate's, etc. It's kind of like a hunger, is looking to fill that void. And I think the church has to step up right now and to point people to truth, to point people to the Christian message and say, okay, you've turned away from extreme wokeism. We're all kind of over that now at large. But the equal and opposite force is not going to fulfill that kind of God-shaped hole. We need to be looking at Christianity as basically a solution that is for the good of everybody.
Have you started to see now that there seems to be among sort of the new atheist, which then transformed to like the anti-woke crowd, kind of realized after, let's call it 2 decades, that basically if you have a vision that's entirely defined in the negative, which is just these are the things we're against, but you don't have anything that we're for, this crowd now seems to be completely lost. And it looks like some, like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, actually have found their way back to faith on sort of like utilitarian purposes. Do you think that's good for Christianity as a whole, to have people who basically say, I'm not fully on board with like, what is it, Christ is King or whatever Candace always was saying? But like, I don't believe, I'm not a Christian myself, so I have to reveal my ignorance here, but I don't fully believe in like the divinity of Christ, but I'll basically sign on to become a Christian as kind of like a bulwark against like wokeism or Islamism or something. Do you think that's a good thing for the religion as a whole?
I think the ultimate question is, what do you serve, right? Because we all, I think as humans, and C.S. Lewis writes about this a lot, is we all ultimately worship or serve something as human beings. And quite often that is ourselves, like, bring ourselves as idol, and therefore as an outworking of that has been the fact, well, if I worship myself and I am God, then I can change anything about my body. I can redesign my entire being. I can become a man, I can become a woman, I can become a donkey. I can do whatever I want because I have the power here. And if we're worshiping ourselves, there's no limit on that, right? There's no reason to say there's anything else, that we are part of a system, that there is a higher power that we give authority to above ourselves. And I think whilst Christianity is good for society and it's good for people to see and value the fact that a society ordered with a higher authority is a better way for us all to live, it is fundamentally good, not because it is good, but because it is true. So I think it's going to be difficult to cross that bridge and to have a belief in a system that is simply good if you don't fundamentally believe it is true. I think truth's got to be the basis for your belief.
I think I agree. I think it will tend to burn itself out as well, because if the grounds are purely pragmatic, that might work at generation one, but all of a sudden you're trying to raise a new generation, and the children are constantly asking these, they wouldn't use the word metaphysical, but they're constantly asking metaphysical questions. They're constantly trying to get at reality. And if you can't give, I'm not saying that all Christian belief should revolve around apologetics and theology, because that would be very arid and dry, and that would neglect all sorts of other important aspects of religious experience. But if you can't, pony up a reasonably decent epistemic defense of your faith as opposed to a pragmatic defense of your faith, I don't think that religious tradition is going to have legs over the generations.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I'll butcher the quote for sure, but what's the line where it's sort of like in the child it becomes fact, what in the father was only like a hypothetical?
Oh, habit, like you mean it becomes ingrained in
yeah. It's like you have doubts, but then that those don't really get passed on to your kids, and they become the true believers.
Sure.
Which actually you see a lot with second generation immigrants into this country.
But I don't think that it's a coincidence though that maybe the father-children dialectic doesn't matter as much as I made it sound, but I think one that certainly does matter is the sort of the elite populace dialectic, because if you've got an elite that doesn't really believe in this stuff anymore, I think it's going to be difficult. I think it's going to be difficult for that religious tradition to sustain itself as well. And I just think that the evidence of history bears that out. That the washerwoman. The sort of medieval washerwoman did not know as much about theology as Thomas Aquinas did, but she knew that the elite structures of the society in which she lived in were just infused with with fundamental Christian metaphysics, and therefore it was a reasonable option for people. And I just think once religion becomes sort of one option among many, and it's not being honoured publicly, and it's not being reinforced by the people whose opinions really matter in a society, I just do think that is going to wither away, particularly if it's only pragmatic.
What do you think the biggest challenge to sort of a resurgence of Christian faith in Europe is? Do you think it would be political? Is it social? Is it like sort of there's a stigma against being religious now? Is it count other faiths? Would it be like, the rise of sort of direct Islamism? What do you think the biggest challenge is?
I think it's probably social, and certainly that's been handed down through the generations. Like probably our grandparents' generation would have leaned to being at least traditionally Christian, and then our parents' generation kind of rebelled against that, and then our generation kind of saw this whole mess and we're like, I'm not sure I want to get involved. The next generation is kind of interesting because they're quite cut off from a presumption towards Christianity, so they've kind of got to make up their minds themselves. So I think that's a really open goal for church leaders to speak into. But I think the kind of remnants of millennial culture has instituted this kind of dirty look at Christianity. It is seen as kind of like the most famous Christian we had in the UK for years was Dot Cotton from EastEnders. He was just this kind of caricature grandmother, and there was no kind of explanation of what Christianity really stands for and that hopeful vision that it can cast for a society. So I think that's lacking. I think that has to be taken up. So to counter that kind of social stigma, which can come across, because I think like there's a lot of misinformation, misunderstanding about what Christianity stands for. It's over a third, I hope that I'm remembering this correctly, but it's over a third of 18 to 34-year-olds think the Bible should be banned if it's found to have hate speech in it. And I would bet my bottom dollar that at least 2/3 of them have not read the Bible, so they wouldn't have a clue what is in the Bible to start with. So I think that misinformation and misunderstanding has to be countered to come against that social pressure. But if that is handled well, I think there's a real opportunity for the next generation to kind of pick up the mantle and say, okay, enough with this mess that we've seen handed down from these generations, and let's have something that is a better way to order and structure our society.
I think one of the biggest threats as well to the survival of any meaningful Christianity, rather than just, improvised Christianity, which isn't really well thought through, because you get I don't want to be offensive to any particular denomination, sure. But we'll park that. Have strong opinions on this. The point I'm making is that I think the churches, and I mean lots of them, the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church, are sometimes their own worst enemies in this respect. Partly because, and okay, fine. I think there's a particular weakness in Protestantism on this front, because I think that in the early days of Protestantism, it was very much a matter of wanting to get rid of all intermediate structures which corralled and disciplined religious experience, i.e. the church, and wanting to replace them by sort of an unmediated relationship between the individual and God. And I think as God has receded from that picture a little bit, and people are less keen to really seek wisdom from the traditions, there isn't that sort of respect for heritage anymore. As Protestantism has become more and more deracinated, it's purely become about the individual, and so you just get people kind of inventing their own forms of religious. So this is why I think you get things like raves in the nave. I think this is why you get things like skateboards go down because I can worship God in my own way, because it doesn't need to be corralled and structured by any kind of theological tradition.
Have you ever seen a video from Germany of guys on their BMX bikes?
You showed me this in the
jumping over the preacher.
Yeah.
trying to get attendance on.
There's this constant desire to try and placate the world rather than move the world, and this is what Chesterton says, that I want a church that moves the world, not a church that moves with the world. Do you not think that the Christianity is very sort of bogged down in worldliness at an institutional level?
Yeah, I can just about guess the institution you're getting at. No, I think that's
the Catholic Church's problem as well, let's be fair.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, it's across all denominations, right? And it isn't. Sometimes the Reformation is kind of dismissed as like, oh, the Protestants just rebelled because they were bored of the structures, and that's not right. True, it was rebellion against corruption.
That's not what I said.
I know, but I think we can both be clear on that there's a lot more to it, and it was a real kind of search for true relationship and to shake off a lot of the fair corruption that was taking place in the day. I think true Christianity, a true relationship with God between the individual and with society, and that the kind of need for recognition of sin, redemption through Christ. All of these things are still very much alive in all denominations, in people who uphold the Christian faith. Where it can get messy is when the church can try and brand itself as not about the centrality of the Christian message, but about trying to be cool, about trying to be a kind of a youth club, which can happen. It can happen in any situation where we take the eye off the gospel and the true reason for the church existing there. And so, yeah, absolutely, your example about the rave and the nave, these are all, we can't confuse and conflate good and well-meaning attempts to evangelize and to reach the population with that, but we also have to remember and uphold the truth and the real message of Christianity and not get lost in that appeal. So it's a tricky and it's a fine, it's important balance to get. And I hope that this next generation coming up, which doesn't have as much of the burden of the previous generations, can kind of shake that off a bit and say, okay, we actually are looking for something different to what's on offer. We've seen the perils of extreme feminism, we've seen the perils of extreme red pill, we don't like extreme gender ideology. All of this stuff doesn't make sense. We actually do want a worldview that makes sense, that orders and structures society, that has a higher power that we all know that we answer to at some point, and puts God at the top of that, and the truth can cascade down that. So I think that is really going to be the way the church can appeal to the next generation, is upholding that and not trying to water down for the sake of looking cool.
Lois McLatchie Miller, it's been a very wide-ranging and nutritious conversation. Thank you so much for coming on to Deprogrammed.
Of course, thank you.
Evan, thank you as ever. You've been watching Deprogrammed. Make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment if you wish to do so, and we shall see you on the next one.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.